Bet the Board presents Stay Green. Stay Green is your first stop for all the metrics, matchups, and money-making opportunities at the track each race week. This is Stay Green, the NASCAR betting podcast. Here are your hosts, Todd Fuhrman and racing analyst Chris Werme.
Welcome into the Stay Green podcast, part of the Bet the Board podcast network. Darlington in the rear view, and it's Brad Keselowski into victory lane, ending a 100-plus race winless streak, much to the delight of all of you Stay Green listeners. I am the host, Todd Fuhrman, joined as always by professional NASCAR bettor and my colleague on this fine program, Chris Werme. And Wormser, we said that there was the opportunity to ladder bet the six, top 10, top 5, dabble in the outright market. And lo and behold, it took a little chaos, but the six used a great qualifying run and parlayed that into victory lane.
What a rocket this car was on the long run. Definitely an interesting race when it comes to, how hard it was to pass. We haven't seen that as often as Darlington. Normally that's a place where you can pass, but I tweeted yesterday that imagine if Brad Keselowski had the first pit stall. I mean, he could have led a lot of laps. Like Reddick was fast, definitely in the short run, but certainly came back to the field after hitting the tail end of the tail end of the field. Brad Keselowski was phenomenal on pit road. There were times I thought he was every time we were watching pit road or the race off pit road, I'm like, he's going to get him. He's going to get him. He's going to get him. And
that's the one thing. It's impossible to see. I mean, look, they talked about it on the broadcast, and credit to Clint Boyer and Kevin Harvick about how valuable the number one pit stall is at Darlington. We saw it last year in the Coke 600, and we'll see it again next weekend, Memorial Day weekend, that you can think you have the best pit stop and you have to go all of 21 feet and you can gas it right out of your box. It is so damn difficult to make up any spots in that regard. But, credit to Brad, gets it done, and RFK starting to build momentum. So shout out to friend of the program, Brian Murphy, whose balls we busted last week, saying it'd be nice to see you guys get in a victory lane, and they were able to do so. Before we get into more of what we saw last weekend at Darlington, I want to remind all of our Stay Green listeners, Stage 1, all about a racing recap, what we learned, what we saw, what we might be able to apply going forward. Stage 2 this week, an all-star preview. Slightly different format as we break things down and how Werme and I are going to go about trying to identify a little bit of value in potentially the outright and matchup market even before cars hit the track. In Stage 3, a unique wrinkle this week as well, a season outlook. We hit the midseason juncture, 13 races down, 13 to go before we'll know the 16 drivers that'll punch their tickets to the postseason, talk about who's trending up, trending down, maybe some dark horse candidates, and get into that in a little bit of detail. But we mentioned Brad getting the win, Worm, and I don't think that shocked either of us when we had high expectations for some of the speed, high tire wear. It fit into his overall profile, but you do have to feel bad for his teammate and Chris Buescher as him and Tyler Reddick get into a little dust up with less than 10 to go. And the 17, while he finished 30th on the stat sheet, had a great opportunity to atone for that near miss a week before at Kansas.
Yeah, that's a bummer for the 17. And you almost feel for him when he approaches Reddick after. So for those of you that didn't watch, Reddick definitely tried to slide job the 17 in order to go for the win, which you definitely want. You want your driver to go for the win, but you also have to be realistic. When Denny Hamlin, your team owner, calls it an ambitious move, that is the most political way to say, well, that was never going to stick. Maybe you just get off the gas there.
I was hoping Denny said it was a 50-50 shot, much like his move to go to the outside of Texas. Then you could understood why Tyler Reddick was trying to take that gamble.
Yeah, it bummer for the 17, but on that note, though, you still have to feel really good if you're RFK Racing. You've shown speed at the tracks where you need to show speed. These 1.5 mile tracks are a majority of the season. They're competing with HMS and JGR, which is, two teams that going into the last couple of weeks had really separated themselves as the dominant, the only competitors you thought maybe headed into the playoffs. But now you're getting to the meat and potatoes of the season, and you're seeing RFK be as fast or faster at times than those teams. And that resonates across all the Fords. I know that Penske hasn't shown a ton of speed, but you certainly have to feel good about at least the horsepower, knowing that RFK is up there battling with JGR and Hendrick Motorsports. So a bummer for Chris Buescher that, Tyler Reddick afterwards just apologizing. I thought Tyler was going to cry on air. He felt really bad, but to Chris Buescher's point, hey, I don't have that sticker on my car yet. And he's right. And also to Chris Buescher's credit, he actually bumped Brad. I thought that he had a chance to pass both Reddick and Brad maybe 3 or 4 laps earlier when Brad and Reddick had kind of gotten into it. And instead of passing them both, he decided to give his old boss a shove. And did he give him a shove? I mean, he hit Brad Keselowski hard, trying to get Brad to the lead. And then he had the same opportunity. And that final time, he just took his chance and was able to clear both of them into one and maintain the spot off 2, which was impressive. And to have Reddick kind of end your day early after losing in the closest race ever. The other thing too, he's going to see that finish for the rest of his career.
100%. You're going to see it over and over again on loop. And if you don't make the playoffs and that's what keeps you out, it's going to loom even larger. So I think once the 17 is able to grab his first win of the season and Chris Buescher can feel comfortable with where he stands in terms of being inside the top 16, he may be able to sleep a little bit easier at night and laugh about that moment. But until then, you're no doubt going to be on pins and needles. And you have to hope that some of the momentum, to your point, that we've seen from Ford and RFK continues forward, because it wasn't just RFK. I mean, look at Ford in general. Josh Berry with a top 3, Chase Briscoe with a top 5, and something I didn't think we'd say, Justin Haley with a top 10, the best ever finish for Rick Ware Racing on a non-super speedway track. So maybe Ford is starting to find some things, or like we always talk about with Darlington, it's as much a driver's track as anything else, even if we didn't see the same comers and goers that we've grown accustomed to with high tire wear.
Well, look at Todd Gilliland. Todd Gilliland, I tweeted during the race, Todd Gilliland is going around Denny Hamlin at Darlington.
He looked great. He looked great in practice, and you and I joked. I mean, people that are going to fall in love with practice data are going to be all over Todd Gilliland. I go, until I see it, I can't do it. And while Gilliland ran well, there wasn't really an opportunity to monetize, because I think Todd Gilliland, you just pencil in -4 on every green flag pit stop.
Yeah, he lost spots all day on pit road and ended up with what I think a 15th place finish, but Michael McDowell, a 10th place finish. The Fords have to feel good. Now, if you're Penske, we mentioned a lot of Fords right there that ran well.
Well, Blaney was fast. I mean, if Blaney doesn't get wrecked, Blaney
Sybil
potentially has a top 10 car.
Yeah,
so,
Sybil loses
Joey
his
Logano, yikes.
Yeah, Logano, it's just kind of shocking. This is a place where, the other thing too, Logano was there all day, though. He did a good job of hanging onto his track position. Now, over these long runs, he didn't pass a soul all day, but he was able to just kind of hang on until
passing in the next gen car is vastly overrated.
Yeah, exactly. Especially when you can just block. So no one needs to panic, in my opinion, in the Ford camp. But it's like they found something again, like whatever happened to Blaney towards the end of the season last year. Ford seems to have found it, and I think that there's some championship potential in that RFK camp, and I'm assuming that the 22 and the 12 will eventually find speed.
I think we always forget how long these seasons are. And while it's easy to overreact to an 8 to 10 race sample size, I don't think over the last 2 years that any of us would have talked about the 12 in 2023 being a championship contender at this point in the season, or Joey Logano the year before. So ebbs and flows, we see momentum play such a big role in the sport. And there's so much tinkering that does take place. The one thing before we close the book on Darlington and move ahead to North Wilkesboro that I think NASCAR has to consider, I'd like to see them change the stage length a little bit more in terms of what they can. And, maybe for Darlington, knowing that the fuel tires are going to run out before the fuel will, maybe you go to a 60 or 65 lap run and you see how tire wear plays a role. Because someone may try and split the stage. Someone's going to stay out. And I think it creates a little bit of an interesting strategy, so much so that it's one of the things that we talked about earlier on super speedways. You'd like to see that at Darlington and Talladega as well, so it doesn't become a fuel-saving race Or in this case, hey, go out there, try and burn off your tires, knowing that you're going to cut the stage right in half, and try and find some unique ways that guys can think outside the box and test some of their acumen a little bit.
Well, it was, you better get it. You better make your passes in the first 3 or 4 laps before, everyone kind of gets strung out. And then you'd have to wait to the leader to catch the tail end of the tail end of the line there. And that would eventually slow the leader down enough in order for the guys in second, third, and fourth to actually make passes. And then the tires would wear off. And then about lap 35, you'd start to see the comers and goers. And then by lap 42, you're already on pit road.
Yeah, exactly.
And so you have like 7 laps. The one time we did see a long green flag run, we saw Kyle Larson get out to like a 7-second lead from like 3 seconds down to a 7-second lead over third place. And he was putting Ty Gibbs in the rearview mirror when he was in second. So I do still think Larson over the long run probably had the best car, but you needed to get to the long run to actually see he was good. And if you're pitting every 35 or 42 laps, the way that the stages break up, it's really hard to figure out who's good at 50 laps or 60 laps. And, we were going to see a long green flag run to the end until that caution came out. But I don't know that anyone was going to run down Brad Keselowski at that point. So,
yeah, I think he would have found a little bit more separation.
What about
there.
Hamlin? Can we talk about where did this come from?
Which in terms
just never
underwhelming, but he finished with a top 10. I mean, you never talked about him all day yet. There's Denny out there rolling around, finishing inside the top 10, somewhere that he hasn't been all that comfortable. And I guess it almost goes back to what Larry Mack had said. You kind of know what your car is going to be. And Denny didn't feel like he had a car that could win the race. So instead of trying to push it for a win, he actually felt comfortable getting a finish and knowing that he had to pick up some valuable place.
Fourth. I mean, that's
points, I should say.
For someone that Denny actually did a good job this week of not getting too frustrated and getting a good finish. That's Denny running around 10th, getting passed by Todd Gilliland can't be exciting for that 11 bunch at all. And for him to kind of come out finishing 4th, I think they came out smelling like a rose. So, but it was just shocking to see him never even be competitive or up there racing for the lead. He did lead his lap, which to me is the cheesiest stat in sports right now. Denny Hamlin leading a lap in 17 straight races. I do not think that him staying out for that extra lap to lead helped the 11 team. He had 1 lap fresher tires than a lot of guys. So this might have been a stroke of the ego for Denny, which I don't know. The fact that people are talking about it, sure, it's something to talk about, but it means nothing in the grand scheme of things, especially when it's strategy based versus actually racing to the front.
No doubt about it. And so we'll put a green, white checkered flag in store for Darlington. Of course, we'll return here for the Southern 500, a race on Labor Day weekend that'll challenge drivers even more with an extended distance, starts during the day, goes into the nighttime, and we'll see what teams and drivers were able to take away from the first Darlington date on the schedule. You can follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there as well. Most importantly, for all things Bet the Board, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you happen to miss it, the NFL offseason podcast. We got Payne out of hibernation back after a Super Bowl hiatus, talking about all of the offseason moves, the draft, and strength of schedule. So I know you NFL zealots out there that may not necessarily be in tune with NASCAR, counting the days until the NFL season starts in earnest in early September. We gave you a little bit to wet your whistle, and more news on the college football front coming in a matter of weeks. But Wormser, we go back to, for stage 2, North Wilkesboro for the second straight year for the All-Star race, but the track going to look a little bit different than what we saw last year, where the big talking point was all about tire wear, some of the unique wrinkles, a track that hadn't hosted a NASCAR event since 1994, but they repaved the track. It's a little more than 0.6 of a mile, so now it's going to be a smooth, flat, short track. No high tire wear with the rain tires or any other nonsense we saw last year. We did have a tire test for a number of drivers that were out there. Not sure what they can or can't take away from that. But when you look at it, and I know the format provides some unique challenges in and of itself, but are there any track comps that you're willing to use when you're looking to handicap this? Is it Loudon-esque? Is it Martinsville? Is it an animal entirely of its own just because of the format we're going to see. And we'll share some of those details in just a moment.
Yeah, I guess maybe Richmond, but Richmond has tire fall off. We're not going to see tire fall off. I mean, repaves are notorious for being really smooth, having a lot of grip, and not a lot of tire wear. It's that weathered tracks. Those are the ones that usually have the tire wear. So I don't even think you can look at last year's race and say that it's a track comp. I think you're going to have to just be really patient, let the week come to you. I do think that there will be, well, yeah, I hope that there will be some value or some investments to be made this weekend, but we don't know until these cars hit the track, especially throw the wrinkle in of multiple tire compounds, which just sounds kind of funny to say. We have seen that in the past at Charlotte, but I hope that we see something a little different this weekend. The last thing you want is for everyone to kind of follow the same compound schedule, because then you're just going to have more of the same. If you do what everyone else does, you're going to just be following the leader. So I don't know that we can actually glean any information from any other tracks. So we're going to kind of head into this, not trying to beat the market at any point this week, just kind of see what happens and just base everything off practice and go from there.
So normally for stage 2, we break down a lot of the drivers that we have our eyes on in terms of who we're buying and selling. But given the unpredictable nature of the All-Star race, things will be a little bit different here. So want to give all of you, our Stay Green listeners, an idea of what you can expect this weekend. I'll run through some of the details. Shout out to Bob Pockrass, who did an outstanding job sharing some of these specs with an article you can check out on Fox Sports. 17 drivers officially entered into the All-Star race, former champions or race winners from last season. We'll also have an open race for 2 drivers to race their way in. And then, of course, there is the fan vote for another driver to enter the field. So we'll finish with 20 drivers basically in the mix when we get to the main event on Sunday. The 20 drivers, though, that aren't already in the field or entered into the open competition, they won't compete on Saturday. They'll have to fight for inclusion on Sunday. The race itself, 200-lap race, all laps will count, overtime rules in effect. Teams will have 2 sets of regular tires, like we're mentioned, and 2 sets of softer tires. Must start on the softer tire, caution at lap 100 with a mandatory 4-tire stop. And then we'll have a caution again at lap 150 where teams will be able to lean into some of their strategy. When we look at the tires, for those who watch F1, they maybe a little bit more familiar with the difference in tire compounds. You'll have a regular tire, which NASCAR will call Prime, short track that they've been using all season. It's one of the softer tires made by Goodyear. The softer tire, which will be called the option tire. It's a new tire that uses the rubber on the rain tires. Hopefully we'll get some of the considerable fall off that we saw at Bristol. And when the rain tire, what NASCAR calls the wet weather tires, because they're used more in the damp than the rain. Did Wormser listen to a interview with Greg Stucker? He said they were hoping for some of the same results that they saw at Bristol. That remains to be seen of exactly what the fall off will look like at North Wilkesboro. But there's also another element when you're handicapping this, and it puts an emphasis not just on the driver, but also what's going to take place in qualifying. And I can allow you, the listener, to fill in the listeners on exactly how that'll work as well.
Well, yeah, the Cup qualifying is not just 1 lap. It's 1 lap and a 4-tire change. So that, a lot of the times when you can just look at pit stop times and say, oh, well, it looks like the 9 team on the tracks that we're looking at have had the fastest pit stalls, but it also is going to incorporate getting on and off pit road. So it's going to take a little bit of talent and finesse to qualify these cars, and it's a full team effort. So they'll be looking at 2 laps. Essentially, you'll have your initial lap and then your second lap after the 4-tire pit stop. And that's how they're going to set the field. So it is kind of a fun way to include or reward the guys that work on the car week in and week out and that are pitting these and take a lot of pride. Have you been to Charlotte and seen what these pit crew facilities look like?
No,
oh my gosh.
Well, let me take that back. I was at the All-Star race at Charlotte, but I didn't kind of get the full experience there to try and see what it was like. But I did attend an All-Star race in Charlotte, and I'm trying to think how many years ago it was. It feels like an eternity, maybe 7 or 8 years ago at this point when it was there in its old traditional format.
Yeah, I was able to go to SHR and see they were pitting. I was watching pit practice, and then you go over to Hendrick, and Hendrick Motorsports looks like a D1 football campus. I mean, they have.
I mean, you've heard these interviews. I mean, everyone is a former athlete, whether it's D1 football, it's baseball players. I mean, it's not like they're pulling these guys, from the local Shell station going, hey, look, you want to be on a NASCAR pit crew? I mean, those days are over. And, it was funny during Darlington, not to go on a tangent, when they had, Bobby Labonte or Terry Labonte. I always get the brothers confused. So shame on me as a NASCAR historian. Talking to me, goes, yeah, look, they decided they basically drew straws each week. Hey, do you want to be the gas guy? Do you want to be the jack man? I mean, these guys are finely tuned athletes, and we're talking about hundredths of a second making the difference between wins and losses. It just speaks to the training that they have to go into and how well choreographed each and every one of these stops are.
Yeah. And I got to correct myself. It's a 3-lap time that will be not just
it's after 2 laps.
It's after 2 laps. Yeah. It's because you're going to have 1 lap and then a pit
stop,
and then another lap. So it'll be just the fastest time will be, and then they'll set they'll set the lineup in that order. So it is kind of a fun little wrinkle. I think it allows for us to maybe dig too much into.
Well, remember, that's also sets it for the heat races. So they'll set the pole sitter from that, but then you'll have the heat races, and where you finish in the heat race will actually set the field for the main event.
So there's a lot going into the qualifying and predicting this race, which is also why it's just kind of nice to sit back and relax, see how everything's going to unfold, and then maybe make some bets. It's usually a small weekend from a betting perspective, but nonetheless, I think it's something that we've been able to capitalize on in the past. Hopefully see around the corner. And gosh, when it comes to actually predicting this race, it's going to come down to strategy as well. With a softer tire, I think that they're all starting on the softer tire for a reason, because they could make it 100 laps on fuel with a hard tire, and that would be very boring. But it'll be interesting to see how long the soft tire lasts, and we don't know that. We don't know if it's going to last. Is it going to last 35 laps? Is it going to last 60 laps? We just don't know. And so that's where the strategy will come into play a little bit. And I think the plan is to have some people on different strategies or on different tires. I think that's what NASCAR is looking for. If they're put in too small of a box to where they can't differentiate themselves with strategy, you're going to see the same shit. You're just going to see them. They're just going to be faster in the short run and slower on the long run. And then they're all going to flip to the harder tire or the prime tire. And then they're just going to fall off less. And we're going to see no passing on a smooth racetrack with a lot of grip. So
like last year where Kyle Larson went out there and pretty much snoozed the entire field. So.
Yeah. And he got lucky because he was starting deep and he just decided to strap on tires late. The thing stayed green till the end and he just won based on that. So I don't think that's what NASCAR had in mind when they had this North Wilkesboro track. And now that it's been repaved, it does make it harder to, it'll certainly be harder to pass, but it's easy to kind of judge NASCAR, on a week-to-week basis, and unhappy about the car, unhappy about this or unhappy about that. But it's a pretty nimble sport. I mean, in the middle of the season, we are trying a new tire that with rain rubber. We get to see it with 20 plus cars on the track just to see how it works out. I mean, you're not going to see a mid-season bat change in the Major League Baseball. You're not going to see any of that in sports. So as much as people and fans are critical of NASCAR, they have the ability with this exhibition in the middle of the season to test something. And the fact that they're taking advantage of it. And I just saw today, and that I retweeted it, that they're actually thinking about taking this tire to Homestead. I mean, don't tease me. That is the biggest tease.
I know you'd love nothing more than a tire that completely deteriorated after 6 laps at Homestead. So, I mean, you want to talk about taking care of your equipment, that's the track to do it.
It's crazy that's the last track that needs the softer tire. There's enough fall off there anyway. Maybe take this tire to Texas. I think Kansas has enough fall off, but we can always have more as long as we talked about this with Larry Mack. Somewhere between no fall off and courting after 30 laps is probably a good spot. So I think that courting makes it difficult. But then again, if these teams know that that's going to happen, if they have a long enough practice window for them to see what'll happen after 40, 50, 60 laps at a track, they can then set their cars up to last longer. There's no way. There's a lot of smart people that are working in NASCAR. There's no way they're just going to say, well, we're just going to have to pit every 35 laps. That's just not a thing in NASCAR. We definitely find guys that could make this thing last a full fuel run, even if it is a softer tire. So it's just, kind of credit to NASCAR. They're giving it a shot. They're at least listening to fans. Now, this is also a thing that requires a large amount of, lead time. You don't just make all these tires, like you don't snap your fingers and then Goodyear has made tires in 10 seconds. Like they have vendors and lead times and supply chains that they're dealing with. So as much as we just want to say, okay, perfect, this rain tire was awesome, it's not going to be implemented the following week. That's just not going to happen. But the fact that they're actually willing to make the change, I think is a bright spot for the sport. And hopefully it pays off, because if it doesn't, there's going to be more bitching and moaning on Monday about a terrible all-star race. But it's tough on a repave. The expectation is set pretty high, and repaves are usually underwhelming.
Well, I mean, that's the whole thing. You kind of paint yourself into a box to a certain extent, and we'll see which drivers and teams are able to go out there and utilize it to their advantage. I know I said at the top of stage 2, Worm, I didn't want to talk about individual drivers, but there is one that I think is worth discussing, knowing that Kyle Larson won't be there to practice the car. He won't be there to qualify the car. So the 5 will be starting dead last, which means 20th in the field. And when you're looking at Kyle Larson, look, this guy could drive anything, including a unicycle, to victory lane, I'm sure, in some capacity. But if you're talking about how you're going about handicapping the 5, it's rare to see him, drift out early in the week. His numbers opened as short as 8-1. He's now out to 12-1. And while he's typically good at most track types, short flats haven't exactly been his hallmark if I'm ranking it. And it's, again, I'm not saying that this guy struggles at those tracks. It's just not the same as high tire wear where a high line comes in. How do you go about assessing the 5 this week? Is he a guy that you're, hoping drifts far enough and you just bet out of principle because, hell, it's Kyle Larson? Or, if there's some matchups in the potential market that you may go, you know what? We're going to see prices on him. I'm going to bet against him and make him show me that he can race through the field on an alternative strategy.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there at the end, is because Larson will be starting in the rear and it's winner take all, he will be the guy that does try another strategy. Especially, I do anticipate this first tire, that the option tire that they're starting on, to fall off. And if it's uniform fall off, you're not going to see any passing. If it's actual, tire wear and not just heat, you could see certain guys that are set up better for the long run and maybe run a little longer before they strap on new tires. But if it's hard to pass, and I still think it will be, absolutely, it's a short race. I mean, 200 laps at a little over half a mile, 200 laps is going to go by real quick. So it'll be important for Larson to make moves and make moves early. And I don't know if that means, only running 20 laps on the softer tire and then getting on that hard tire and running that for 80 laps. I don't know. But anytime Larson is starting, deeper in the field, I think that there's opportunity because it is so hard to pass. Now, I think that Kyle Larson's prices typically are, a top 5 qualifying is baked in. And we did see him open a little higher at like an 8 to 10-1 price, but I don't think that was high enough. I still thought he was definitely overvalued because it will be so hard. And this is not a Kyle Larson track. If Kyle Larson were starting 27th at Martinsville, I don't know that I'd be rushing to bet him, but Kyle Larson typically qualifies well in these short tracks and then hangs on to his track position. Whereas this year, starting last, he's going to have to do something drastic in order to get up to the front. Now, last year, yes, I know he started deep in the field, but that was a strategy call that got him the win. It looked like he was beating the brakes off the field, but he put on fresher tires early on and
stayed green.
It stayed green, and he was able to get the victory. So, and where's his mind? We talked about this with Kurt Busch when he was saying, when you're at Indy, that's a big race. And I'm not saying that Kyle Larson is taking the All-Star race lightly. That's not what I'm saying. But if you got other things on your mind, it's hard to compete at a high level. If you want to find a golfer that's not going to play well, find one that has some stuff going on in his personal life, and it's really hard to perform. So
unless you're Rory McIlroy, who files for divorce 2 days after he beats the brakes off the field in the final round. So
yeah, that's a good point, Rory. But that's I almost said something that would have, well, Rory's generational talent. I guess you could say the same thing about Kyle Larson. So, but there is an element to the fact that Kurt did bring that up, that it is hard to have your head in both places. I'm not saying he's concentrating in Indy more. That's not what I'm saying. It's just there, and it's not easy. So that being said, if there's someone that could do it, probably Kyle Larson.
No, for sure. And I think, it's just an interesting storyline to follow, adds a little bit of intrigue. Kevin Harvick will be out there driving the 5 car, but there's no doubt Kyle Larson will be leaning on his HMS teammates to figure out what they found that worked, what they think that doesn't work, and how they can make some of those adjustments potentially to get all of this stuff headed in the right direction. Green, white, checkered flag on stage 2 into stage 3. And we don't have to spend a ton of time here, Worm, because we're going to have an opportunity to delve into some of these topics going forward. There are plenty, unfortunately, unbettable races that'll be coming up during the summer months where we can revisit big picture storylines to try and fill a bit of airtime. But when we look at stage 3, as far as season outlook, we talked a little bit at the top of the show about teams trending up. RFK, probably the top of the list with Brad, 3 top 2s over his last 5 races. Buescher could theoretically have 2 victories on his resume as well. Chase Elliott, best average finish over the last 5 races, was really an afterthought last week. Thankfully for Stay Green listeners, as we had to sweat bullets with Ross Chastain driving a donkey around the track, but finishing 1 spot better than the 9 car. And then when you look at Chase Elliott's teammate, Alex Bowman, who I said I thought would race poorly at Darlington, he gave me a nice big shit burger to eat with yet another top 10. 5 coming 5 over the last 6 races. But other than some of those storylines, who have you seen that's really trending up, at least through the first half of the season?
Well, I think you have to look at RFK. I think that there's those guys are still sitting, 18 to 20 to 1 range on Keselowski, and then that 30 to 35 to 1 on Chris Buescher. I think that's where you have to look, just because they're showing speed. I've said this, I think, repeatedly on this podcast, that the last thing you want to be worried about going into, whether it's the final 4 or the final 8 or even the final 12, is, will we have speed this week? You just want to know that if you have adjustability built in your car and you can get the best possible finish. If you don't know if you're going to show up with speed, it's really hard to win the championship. You have to get really lucky in order for that to happen. So I think that if you're RFK, you just got to feel good that you're competing with JGR and HMS. So again, at this point in the season, we've seen the last couple of years that it's just get hot at the right time. And so to look at a favorite and say, oh, you like Kyle Larson because he's had some great finishes, he's leading the points, I think that
you're going to be able to get the price on Kyle Larson at 4 to 1 that's widely available going into Martinsville.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you just look at just the start of the playoffs, we're starting in Atlanta, then we're going to Watkins Glen, then we're going to Bristol. If you can tell me the 12 drivers that are not going to have any issues in those first 3 races, I can tell you the guys that are going to be moving on. But we've seen Atlanta, obviously incredible finish, but there's a big one that could happen in Atlanta. Go to Watkins Glen, and then also we're going to have the Charlotte Roval. So you're going to have 2 road courses in the playoffs, and we haven't seen that before. We also have
probably enjoy the Charlotte Roval now, because I can't imagine when the schedule gets unveiled for 2025, if we are indeed heading to Mexico City, like Jeff Gluck and Jordan Bianchi have kind of tipped their hand replacing Richmond on the schedule, that I don't think that'll be another road course that gets added. The Roval feels like it's fait accompli, knowing how well these cars have raced on 1.5-mile tracks, that we should be going back to the more traditional layout. But tangent, so sorry about that. Didn't mean.
Yeah, I just think that throwing road courses, and that brings a whole nother group of drivers in there. I mean, especially since they're obviously not in the same rounds, it could be the saving grace for a guy like McDowell if he finds his way in. If I'm going to say the best value on the board is absolutely Chris Buescher with 2 road courses in the playoffs. He's really good at super speedway racing, and as is Brad Keselowski. But where Chris Buescher has really separated himself from Brad is at road courses. He is a top 10 machine. We haven't seen him up there kind of racing for wins, but man, he has to have road courses circled as where he's the favorite, especially throwing the fact that they have speed on 1.5 miles. I anticipate Chris Buescher to be really strong at road courses that we have coming up, which will include Sonoma. Even the Chicago street course is a little bit different, but I think that I anticipate Chris Buescher to be good. The speed is there. I think that that's kind of the best future price on the board when it comes to the championship, at least at this point in the season.
In terms of drivers trending down, I mean, I know we had a little bit of exposure to him. Thankfully, he got us to the window in his head-to-head matchup, but Ross Chastain hasn't really been a factor in most races this season. Hasn't actually had a top 10 since Coda. We look at Chris Bell, 13th or worse in 5 out of 6 races. Another guy that we thought could be a little bit better. And then I know we touched on Joey Logano at the top, so I don't think we need to revisit that. So as far as Chastain and Bell, still plenty of time to turn their season around, but these are two drivers that have immense talent that I think both you and I expect more from on a week-to-week basis, and just really haven't seen that more often than not.
Yeah, I don't know what to think about this Chris Bell. Maybe this week, it'll be a good indication of if Chris Bell, if it's just the short tracks that he's excelling at, or that short track package. But last week was pretty bad for a car that looked really good in practice. He was non-existent. And my biggest issue with Ross Chastain is we've taken kind of aggressive moves on him, both at Dover and at Darlington, 2 of his very best tracks. And if you're going to show speed, you're going to show him at your best tracks. And he was nowhere to be found after looking decent in Darlington practice. Not great, but decent. Dover, he was just kind of bad the whole weekend. So there's got to be some concern there. And the 99 and Daniel Suarez, he's just a pylon out there trying not to get put a lap down. That is he's the new Ryan Newman. He's tough to pass, and he's he's got literally and figuratively both hands on the wheel right now with that 99 car. It doesn't seem to be getting any better, but it doesn't pay to be good this point in the season. It pays to be good those last 10 races. So I don't think that Trackhouse is going to just kind of roll over, but the consistency is not there. One top 10 since Coda, or hasn't had a top 10 since Coda.
Yep.
That's a problem, especially when it includes 2 of your best racetracks. And he's also not driving by anybody. We used to see Chastain make passes, and you're just not seeing that. And so there's got to be some concern there. Joey Logano, he'll figure it out. I'm not worried about Joey Logano. That's just him and Paul Wolf. They'll figure it out. But especially with Fords having speed, I think that they'll be able to build off of this pathetic base that they have right now. They're going to get better.
And look, I mean, Joey Logano right now, if the season ended today, finds himself on the outside looking in terms of a playoff picture. So he's got some work to do. Ross Chastain, a little bit more breathing room as he's 40-plus points clear of the cut line. When you look at how the battle at the bottom has kind of played out, although you jockey enough for wins and losses and things change a little bit, but I think it's a little bit early in the season to go through all of those permutations. You can follow Chris on social media at Chris Werme 15. I'm Todd Fuhrman. You can follow me there for all things Bet the Board. Be sure to follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And Wormser, I know we talked a little bit as we broke down North Wilkesboro about how there may be some opportunities after we see these cars perform during practice on Friday, the open on, or I should say the qualifying heats on Saturday. It's a long weekend of on-track activity, but is there anything that we think odds makers have overvalued going into the weekend that we think are worthwhile for our listeners to be building their portfolio early this weekend?
Yeah, we did nibble some Chase Elliott over Kyle Larson. That price is -130. I just don't see that getting shorter for Chase. I think that that team's been very solid on pit road, and Chase was strong at Martinsville. I kind of anticipate him to be strong again, but I think that's the only real thing. You're just kind of anticipating Larson to struggle. This will be the first time he goes on the track will be when he's racing competitively. And it might take a second to get that car up to speed. I know that he has Kevin Harvick driving that car for him. I can't imagine that Kevin Harvick and Kyle Larson drive similar race cars. So there could be some, Larson could be getting in there and going, what in the hell is this? And
this thing's plowing, baby. It's plowing.
Yeah. Or this thing was bad in practice, which is just a Harvick thing, never fast in practice. So at least in this car. So we took a little bit there. I would say definitely follow our Twitter feeds to make sure we're going to keep that once we the race. But at this point, I think you're still beating the market, having a little bit of that Chase Elliott over Kyle Larson. I just don't see it. I see that, maybe closing, maybe 165, 170. And depending on what we see in practice and some comments, we may keep or we might buy that back. So just kind of make sure if you're going to play that, follow us on social media and make sure that we decide to keep that, because I do anticipate that to get that chase price to extend out a little bit.
Yep. And I was going to say this week, when you look around the markets, there are some relatively limited offerings that are out there. A little bit surprised, quite candidly, that a pretty prominent book has some of these drivers as heavy favorites in some of their head-to-heads. I know some books also have Denny Hamlin listed as a $1.40 favorite over Kyle Larson. Look, I think that's probably a fair reflection of where that number needs to be.
Yeah.
And when you look at some of the other prices. So do shop around, a little bit of a limited offering given the unique wrinkles. And like always, big race on deck, the Coke 600, the longest race on the NASCAR schedule. Memorial Day weekend, a tentative marquee guest lined up for next week's show, looking to try and iron out those details. Yep. So be excited if we can get him into the fold. But other than that, Worm, is there any parting shots, things you'd like to share with our loyal listenership before we bid him a fond farewell?
No, I got nothing. We'll enjoy the weekend. It'll be a light weekend. Still
you doing a pull, normal schedule for you, or are you gonna take the week off?
That's pending.
Pending.
They'll be pending. If I don't see anything in practice and qualifying that's worthy of, betting, then I don't need to find action. We have a lot of races left in the season. The goal is to make money. It's not to, not just looking for action. So that'll be a TBD. But yeah, I don't know. Maybe we'll have a ton of bets. Who knows? I doubt it, but
Worm will be firing the full board on the open race. Looking to try and get involved with back markers as they try and race their way into the field. So
yeah, like Michael McDowell. Come on, you gotta like that.
Try and find different things. But all right, my friend, we've done enough damage. I want to wish all of you, our loyal listeners, the best of luck with all of your investments this weekend from Norwich Wilkesboro. Like we said, back next week with a Coca-Cola 600 preview, maybe talk a little bit of Indy as well. And we'll see if Worm can find somebody to dethrone Max Verstappen at Monaco, the crown jewel on the F1 schedule as well. Could be buying into that McLaren hype, hoping that Lando Norris.
Oh, I'm buying into that. I've already bought in.
Has bridged the gap in the competition that we know as more or less the Dutch victory lap more often than not. So most importantly, though, with a head-to-head matchup, Chase Elliott minus $1.30 over Kyle Larson for the All-Star race this weekend. We'll see you at the window.